and welcome to The Way Home, Crossnore Communities for Children's Facebook Live show, as well as our podcast. My name is Holly Kessler, and I am the Senior Director of Community Relations at Crossnore. We are right here every Tuesday afternoon, and we get to talk with some staff members at Crossnore or some community partners, and we talk about the work that we do, the child welfare system, ways we're engaging in our community, and sometimes other educational topics like we're going to talk about today. And so if you miss our live show, you can always rewatch us on our Facebook feed, or you can catch the show on our YouTube channel. The podcast comes out on Fridays on our blog at crossnore.org. So there are plenty of ways for you to watch our show each week, and I hope you'll continue to join us. Today, my guest is a repeat guest. It is Angela Woods, Crossnore's Chief Operating Officer. And Angela is going to discuss her journey into leadership, especially from the perspective of an African-American woman. So I'm excited about this conversation and would ask you to say hello to Angela with me.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
Good.
Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. I'm excited about this conversation. For folks that maybe have missed you've been with us before, and maybe some folks have missed that, but I'll link it in the show notes so people can find it. But tell us again who you are and about your role at Crossnore and anything else that you want to share with us.
Oh, sure. I am Angela Woods, and I have been at Crossnore just over 2 years. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for the organization. And what that means is I have responsibility and oversight for legal and risk management for finance, HR, IT, facilities. I'm sure I'm missing one, but I have a great opportunity to work with some really committed people. Mm-hmm. I'm also the executive sponsor for our diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging work that we're doing that is being spearheaded by Amber Rucker.
That's great. Well, you're not busy at all, Angela.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, as you mentioned, you're our Chief Operating Officer, but I also know that you have held CEO or Executive mm-hmm. Director positions. Yeah. So I thought we would start off with kind of what was your educational path? Like, did mm-hmm. you take a particular educational route to get where you are, or was it more, on the job training, mm-hmm. that kind of advancement as you learned about business and especially in the nonprofit world?
So I wish I could tell you that I had a plan from the age of 21 that I knew that I was going to be running a philanthropic organization or work for philanthropy. I absolutely had no clue of that. Oh, wow. When I went to college, I graduated from Spelman College, which was a HBCU, which is for women, based out of Atlanta. I really thought that I would be on a path to being a psychologist. I was a psychology major.
Wow.
And loved it, and had actually applied to Ohio State University to get my PhD in counseling psychology at the time. And so I knew this is what I wanted to do. Well, at the time, my parents thought, well, can you get a job doing that? We think you ought to go to law school. This is a true story. And so I was like, well, yeah, because it was a full ride. It was I just want to put perspective. And so my dad actually talked me into, he said, well, you need to do something more secure. And, you write really well, and you talk a lot. So I think you should go to law school. And that's really how I ended up my parents talked me into going to law school. So I turned down that full ride. Ride at Ohio State and became a first-year law student at University of Georgia, finished there, and then clerked for a judge in Savannah, and then I practiced for a while. And all the time, I think that the time that I was in law school, I recognized that I was really doing it because my parents wanted me to do it, but not because I had a great passion for it. Mm-hmm. And so that then led me to going back and getting my MBA, because I figured, let me just round this legal degree out, because I need to know the business aspect of how things work. And so I then got hired. I did an internship and got hired from a little known bank called NCNB, maybe familiar to some of you.
Yes.
All right. Nations Bank and Bank of America, and interned there. That's what got me to Charlotte. And then I did a lot of volunteer work as a person of privilege. I grew up in a family that was upper middle class, that had lots of advantages, but my parents really instilled in me the idea of giving back and never leaving anybody behind and always paying it forward. And so I was volunteering and just kept volunteering. And then I just decided, I want to do this for a living. I want to give back. I want to work for philanthropy. I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
And so I had the opportunity to join then United Way of Central Carolinas and worked for the president, directly for the president there. I kind of went in and made my own job and said, hey, I have all these skills. I want to help you. I know I can help you. And she said, okay. And so eventually that was kind of fortuitous. And that's why I think not only having, I think education is absolutely important, but making relationships and, kind of trying things that you don't necessarily think will work. Sometimes they do. And that's how I got connected to philanthropy probably over 25, 30 years ago, and have been in philanthropy ever since.
Wow. So really the answer to my question is that you did both. So you got a really good education. You got a lot of education.
Kind of fortuitous, but it was not a plan. I just kept going. I'm like, yeah, let me do something else. Yeah.
But then you also gathered a lot of skills and interests through your volunteer work that then you were able to turn into a position by sort of pushing open some doors yourself.
Yeah, it was really a great opportunity because I'm, if you know anything about me, Holly, I'm curious.
Yes.
So whenever I would ask a question, my then boss would say, well, why don't you go figure that out? Okay. And so through that responsibility, I had, I ran finance. I served as the interim finance director. Then I did HR for a while, and then I did community building for a while. And so I ended up through that 10-year experience and really having a great mentor. And at that time was my boss said, go and try it. And, make your mistakes and I'll be here to support you. That's how I learned kind of the ins and outs of philanthropy, and was there in United Way, Central Carolinas for 10 years, then left there to become the COO, an interim CEO of the United Way of the nation's capital. And was there 2.5 years, and then decided, I'd done this United Way thing for a while. It's time for me to do something else. And I got a call from a recruiter who was talking to me about Girl Scouts. And that's how we started talking. And I was like, I don't know, we'll see. So that's how I ended up in the Girl Scout movement.
Okay. And so tell us, that was kind of my next question was, and you've started talking about your actual career trajectory. It's a hard word to say. So tell us then about the Girl Scouts. After you left United Way, then you went to a couple of different positions with the Girl Scouts, right?
Yeah. And so the reason I left United Way, it was a great experience, but United Way, I think at that time, it's probably been 15 or 20 years ago, was very what I call transactional philanthropy. We raised a lot of money, we distributed it to a lot of community partners, and they in fact did the work and served the community. I was looking for something more of a direct service, and my passion has always been about supporting women and girls. And so I'd done that in a volunteer capacity for many years. And then when I got the call from the recruiter, he said, hey, Girl Scouts. And I was like, I was a Girl Scout as a child, and I wasn't really good at camping, or, I didn't really like cookie sales. What is, and so he said, well, no, they're really changing their business model. They're looking for people who haven't been in the Girl Scout movement, who really want to support girl leadership development. And that was music to my ears. And so got the opportunity to kind of step out, because I left DC and went all the way over to Memphis, two completely different environments, two completely different cultures. But here again, it was one of those things where, this was my first full-time CEO gig. And I wanted to try it. And, I stayed there for 4.5 years as the CEO for Girl Scouts Heart of the South, which was a great experience. It was really, I had never been to that area of the country. It was a while since I'd been deep South. I'm from the South, but this is deep South, Mississippi. That's very different from North Carolina, South Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
And Memphis has its own personality as well.
Mhm.
And so what I learned, I think, in that experience is if you can continue to build relationships, meet people where they are, find out where the commonality is. And in my case, it was around uplifting girls who didn't have opportunities.
Mhm.
Then you can bring people together. And so that was a great experience, and was planned on staying there until I got a phone call from Charlotte, from some former colleagues who said, "Hey, Girl Scouts is open in Charlotte. Don't you want to come back to Charlotte?" I was like, "I don't know, maybe, I don't know."
Yeah.
And so I kept getting phone calls, and then I started talking to people, and then next thing you know, I was at the head of Girl Scouts Hornets Nest, and so stayed with that organization. Same different area of the country, same mission,
Right.
still focused on uplifting girls and women, young women's leadership. And then, about my 7th year, I thought, I really want to do something a little bit different. Don't know what that looks like. But I'd like to stay in a leadership role, but not necessarily be the CEO, because
Mhm.
I'd done that. And
Yeah.
I was kind of done that, got the t-shirt and hat.
Right.
And it was, it was a great experience. I highly recommend people, it is not about glamour. It is, you have to
Right.
worry, when you're the CEO, the buck stops with you. You
Absolutely.
don't get to walk away. You don't get to
Mhm.
delegate. You have to show up every day.
Yeah.
And so it was during the course of that, and then COVID hit. I saw that Brett had an advertisement for a COO, and it was on LinkedIn, and I liked it. And then he and you can put this on that, you can quote me on this.
Yes.
He DM'd me and said, he went in my DMs and said, "Hey, I saw where you liked my post."
Yeah.
So Brett and I had got to know each other in the United Way world. So we had known
Okay.
each other
Yeah.
for years, and
Yeah.
we were colleagues in years. And he was like, "Well, look, you want to talk?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay." And here I am.
Well, and here you are. And what you just said about relationships is so
Hmm.
important, because Brett has done that for a number of folks, and a number,
Hmm.
myself included, of,
Hmm.
of knowing him sort of in a different realm,
Hmm. Hmm.
and, him seeing a place at Crossnore that would be a really good fit for somebody. And so I'm did not know that about
Yeah.
how you came to Crossnore. So I'm
Okay.
excited to know that we have that in common as well.
Hmm.
But
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and also in reference to what you have said about relationships, you mentioned mentors a while
Hmm.
ago. So talk
Hmm.
a little bit about how important mentoring has been for you in
Sure.
this in your career path as well.
Sure, and particularly as I call myself a seasoned African American woman. I'm in my 50s.
Hmm.
So, when I was growing in my career, I often was looking for people who look like me.
Hmm.
I was looking for people who had the experience that I wanted to have. And so I was pretty active in trying to make relationships and make them authentically with older women,
Hmm.
who were more seasoned and could give me advice about, how do you show up? What should I be doing? Who do you think I should be talking to? And that really has really helped me in a lot of ways. And I think it helped me in ways to make connections, but it also helped me in ways to learn what not to do, right?
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
so there's always opportunities. I think you can follow people and do what you admire in them, but you can also learn from some of their failings. and,
Yes.
and so so I've had the great opportunity to have been exposed to a number of women of color, and particularly African American, powerful women who, like my mom, were just confident in their own skin, but also were willing to show some vulnerability, which I also
Hmm.
appreciated too. So.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that is terrific. Um, so, I think you mentioned you're the executive sponsor of our DEIB initiatives here, and working with Amber Rucker. And I think a lot of organizations, especially over the last several years, have really been turning to how do we open up opportunities for more diverse candidates.
Mhm.
And so, how does an organization do that? I mean, I think you think about sort of the pipeline to a job. It's, well, you post an opening, and then you get applications, but how can you really make sure that that's, you know, you're reaching out to a more diverse population.
Yeah. So I think, my experience has been, and I've heard over and time again, we can't find people. We can't find the
Yeah.
candidates. We don't know where to go. Well, you're not looking. You don't have relationships. And if I am a person that's recruiting, I have relationships in all aspects, whether that's, white, whether that's Asian, whether that's,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that's important. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think shifting the perspective of, widening your gaze, right? So if you
Mm-hmm.
stay if you stay in a highly segregated bubble, you of course will not find those candidates. And then I think the other piece is to really shift, the idea that um, you have to do something special to find diverse candidate pools. The issue is building relationships and getting folks to trust you. Because if you're if you are an African American person who's specializing in technology, they have choices.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at your environment to see if you're supportive of who they are as a person, and who do are you really walking the talk in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think the organizations, to answer your question, really have to be really clear and honest with themselves about what have they done to broaden the tent,
Mm-hmm.
for the organization, and make those intentional relationships. People know when they're being targeted as a check mark.
Mm-hmm.
People know when they are being sought out because of the color of their skin. They know that, and so it becomes a inauthentic environment when you're not really thinking about um, everything you do holistically. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the reasons why I was so passionate about DEIB is, this is not new. I mean, the
Right.
concept of diversity, and although it's been changed, the words that we use have changed over the years. It's been here. The issue is it's not changed much. The
Mm-hmm.
numbers have not changed much.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't just get there through legislation. People have to be willing to be vulnerable and open themselves up to people who are different from themselves,
Yeah.
and um, sharing authentic experience with one another. Because at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, recognizing people's lived experience, and providing that space for real vulnerability, you get a better product. What we find, I think, in a lot of our situations, is that people are wrestling for power, right? If I bring somebody else in, then that means that then something else bad is going to happen. I'm going to lose, as opposed to making it a win-lose, making it a win-win situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess this is just kind of a follow-up question,
Uh-huh.
because I do hear that, folks say, well, the applicants I get are the applicants I get.
Hmm.
Like I don't feel like I have a pipeline of diverse applicants. Are there any kind of practical thoughts that you have around addressing that pipeline of applicants?
Yeah. So the first question I'm going to ask for somebody that says that is, what have you done?
Okay.
What who do you have in your personal network? What does your tent look like?
Mm-hmm.
And so that will very clearly give me a sense of whether or not they're open to the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
for me, here's an example that I used. One of the things I wanted to do when I was in Girl Scouts is create a focus for higher engagement with the Latina community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not Latina,
Right.
but I have friends and networks within the Latino community. And
Mm-hmm.
so I asked them, what is the best and most authentic way for us to approach this? Is this a good idea? What do we do?
Mm-hmm.
And so engaging them in the process. But again, it's part of relationship building. I refuse to believe that you don't have the pipeline. It
Yeah.
just because if it's you, just like there's a high competition for communications directors and marketing, I mean, you can't just say, well, no, you want the most broad and most talented and most sought after folks. So you have to broaden your tent and make that effort.
Yeah. And I like what you said about those authentic relationships, because if I have an authentic relationship of, with someone that is not white like I am, then I can call them up and say, hey,
Hmm.
what do you think about this? Give me some advice. Who do
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
Rather than calling up somebody that, maybe I've met, but I don't really have a good relationship with, then it does feel like I'm just trying to check off a box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
And what do you think about organizations whose leadership is not diverse? How do you, thinking about the C-suite and, or senior management type positions, you're laughing, but what would you say to an organization that just hasn't diversified that leadership group?
So I often joke with Brett and say I'm representing everybody in the C-suite. The reality is, Crossnore, just like many other organizations, philanthropic and otherwise, have a real dearth in terms of diversity in leadership and include.
Mhm.
It's just that is the market, and that's what it is. I think that the challenge becomes recognizing it, and also if we think about Crossnore, let's just use Crossnore since we're here. If as positions come open, we want to make sure that we're filling it with the most qualified person. But have we stopped for a minute to think, is there somebody else who has a different perspective, who's from a different background, who has the same qualifications that we might be able to strategically recruit to us rather than just filling the position, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so I think as I have experienced Crossnore and other organizations that are committed to serve kids who are coming to the child welfare system, many of
Mhm.
those kids look like me.
Yeah,
And representation, kids often cannot be who they cannot see.
right.
And so I think it's incumbent upon us to not only to make the effort, to recognize the effort, and to say when we need to do more, um, to really focus on how we do that, right? And
Mhm,
and
mhm.
philanthropy is not very different from corporate America. It is still very largely white.
Yes.
And especially on the donor side, does
Mhm.
not mean that there's not diversity and inclusion in donors. But in order to get in front of those donors, you have to have the relationships,
Right.
and then you have to have the recognition that those donors are important to you, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I think we've made a lot of progress here. And I think, as I look out across other organizations, I think we're doing well, but we can always do better.
Always. Yeah. Always can do better. Absolutely. Do you feel like that there's a role that the board, whether it's Crossnore's board or it's, any other organization's board, is there a role that a nonprofit board plays in helping to diversify the leadership of the organization?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. If your governance doesn't recognize that this is a core value to your organization, then you're just in a hamster
Hmm.
wheel, right?
Hmm.
And so again, um, you know, boards the represent the demographics of the community, but not the diverse community necessarily, right?
Right.
Because being on a
Right.
board, oftentimes you pick from folks who have privilege. And
Yes.
so you pick for people who can influence others, who have relationships, who can make donations, who can help you move your mission forward. And oftentimes those boards are not diverse. They have great reach, but they do not necessarily mirror the people that you serve.
Hmm.
But I also think, though, that with some of the work that we've done with our board, bringing that recognition
Hmm.
and recognizing that it's important is something that I think that Brett has taken some good leadership in bringing that to the forefront.
Yeah.
But I think you have to provide people an opportunity and some toolkits, because sometimes folks just don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to do it. They're scared to say the wrong thing. And, again, I go back to relationships and authenticity. Creating an opportunity for boards to feel successful, for boards to create their own opportunities, their own journey, and broadening their own base of constituency can only help the organization get better.
Yeah, because to me, it seems like that board, if you have some diversity in your board, that's a good place to build some authentic relationships that then maybe could help you to diversify certainly your leadership or even other positions in your organization.
100%. And I would also say, in a lot of organizations, I go back to the idea of privilege. Even though you may have diversity and inclusion, what happens, I think, oftentimes in communities is that you may know a handful of influential African American, Latino, Asian folks who get picked to do everything.
Yeah, they can't be on every board, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent upon us to not just lean on them, but for them to pay it forward, to offer other opportunities to other folks so that they can be brought into the tent. So making that tent wider.
Yeah, that's great. Well, last question here before we run out of time, but just sort of turning our lens maybe to diverse candidates who want to move into leadership roles. What are some practical suggestions you would give them for their own career path?
Yeah. So I think one of the things, my earliest lesson, as I've kind of ascended into various leadership roles, is that to remain accessible. When I was, identifying mentors, I had to do a lot of maneuvering to get in front of people. And quite frankly, it was challenging and it became demeaning in some cases. What I determined that if I ever got in a role where I had to make a decision or I had decision-making power, that I would remain accessible. So if anybody wanted to talk to me about my path or how I could support them, I would give them the time and listen to them about what they wanted to do. And I think it is so critically important to the folks, to the people that work at Crossnore, to not only talk with each other, but to talk to me and others who are in these roles about the good, bad, and the ugly. Because one thing that I will share is the truth. It has not been an easy path. It has been a challenging path, but it's made me better I think as a human being and as a leader for others, because my line of sight is paying it forward for the next person to come in this role.
Yeah. So remaining accessible, you've talked about finding mentors, and even in your own story, you talked a little bit about, maybe sort of creating a position for yourself, sort of pushing open some of those doors for yourself rather than, waiting on somebody else to open the door. So I think all of those are really practical things that any of us could do, to advance in our career.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think losing the idea, I grew up in a time where, as one of probably very few people in a leadership role in the philanthropy, that I had to be perfect. I could not make mistakes. If I was talking to a younger version of myself, I would say, make those mistakes and learn from those mistakes. You don't have to be perfect.
No.
And that's what I would share with anybody.
You also can't be perfect. So
right.
You're going to make yourself crazy trying.
1,000%.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Angela, I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate learning more about you and your journey, but also just being able to have this open conversation as we really look to do a better job at Crossnore, but also encourage our friends and neighbors in our community to do a better job also in their own search for diversity in their communities. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
You bet. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely. Well, friends, as I have thanked Angela for being with us today, let me also say thanks to each of you who are watching or listening. We appreciate the opportunity to tell you about Crossnore. And for more information, please visit our website at crossnore.org. You can also follow us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. That's it for today, but I hope you will join us again next week on the way home.